My name is Alan Burke. I live in Montauk, born and raised here. This is the entrance to Fort Hill Cemetery in Montauk. I manage the place, and I'm also the grave digger. It was totally different than before because when the pandemic started, you couldn't go to church and have the services anymore. You couldn't go to the funeral homes and have wakes. So everything was done at the cemetery because it was open air. So we had the whole thing right here, and of course everybody was wearing masks and in the beginning staying 6 feet apart. As the end of the funerals would come, a lot of the masks would come off and the hugging and kissing would start, but that's just human nature. But it was very different here. We've had no people die of COVID that were buried here during the pandemic, but as you know, the population's getting older, so there were more funerals than normal. We never got any direction from anybody on how to conduct the funerals, so we just kind of went with the flow, and people took care of themselves, and it went okay. We got through probably, it's a very young cemetery in ages of cemetery. It's only about 30 years old, which is young because most of my relatives that live here are going to East Hampton because that's where their spouses and parents are. So it is young. So we only do about 10 a year, and pretty much most of them now are cremations. The whole world is going to cremation. The challenges really weren't that bad during the pandemic, except that people just did not want to stand next to each other. Of course, they loved each other, but some people, they would stand 20 to 30 feet away, and it's always windy up here because this is Montauk, and they couldn't even hear the priest or the rabbi or the minister because they were so far away and it was windy. I had a way of treating the crowd like a flag on a flagpole. I'd always make sure that the priest, rabbi, or minister was upwind, talking to everybody, so then they could spread out and the wind would carry the voices, and they all felt better that way. So it truly worked out pretty good like that. Everybody was scared all the time, and they just didn't know what their next move was going to be, because people didn't get together at the time. This was one of the few places that people actually did get together. And it was, even people I knew, everybody was in a state of what's going to happen next. I'm a first responder, so I was one of the first in the island to get the vaccines back in December or beginning of January for the first shot. So, and I work outside and I work by myself, so I did not have a lot of concern. Most people, you couldn't have two people on any job, any place, or code enforcement would sneak around and throw you off the job. Because I worked by myself, I got to go to any job that I had and work there. As far as grave digging, I dig the graves by myself. I set them up. The interaction I have is, I don't know if you know what the vaults are, but we bury, all caskets have to go in vaults in Fort Hill Cemetery for settling purposes, concrete vaults. Those, I deal with the guy that brings the vaults out, but during the pandemic, he came out and dropped them off ahead of time, so I even installed them myself. Other than that, the funeral director, of course, does the planning, and I do just the physical part. I'm there through the funeral. I try to find out, I sneak around trying to find out what the person was like, what they did, just from people talking about the person they're interring, or I'm interring. And which is, I love this place so much. I want to know everybody here. And I always considered myself to be the last person to do something nice for the person that's being buried. So it's a labor of love, pandemic made it different, but it helped me a lot because I got to learn a lot more about the people. We had a local family at Gosman, and that's a local going back way to the early 1900s, and it was one of the biggest funerals we've ever had out here. And with the spreading out of everybody trying to stay 6 feet apart, they were all over. They took up the whole cemetery. Luckily, it was a beautiful day. They could all hear the sermon given, the homily given. Everything was given right here. The prayers, the homily, the singing, you name it, was right here. And it worked. I'll never forget that funeral. And after seeing nobody for months, to have such a crowd, people kind of enjoyed it. You know, it was getting through the pandemic, not done, but getting through it, and people just enjoyed being there next to other people, even though they weren't close, but they were there. There are 22 cemeteries in the town of East Hampton. Some of them are just a little fence going around graves from the 17 and 1800s. There's 3 other grave diggers around. We cover each other when vacation time comes. So if there's a job in a burial in Sag Harbor, they'll call me. I'll take all my equipment up there and dig the grave for them up there, and they do the same for me out here. We talk, but not a lot, because we're all in the same boat. We all know. I've been here 30 years burying here, and they've been around for 15 and 20 years. So we all know our job pretty good, talk on the phone once in a while. Otherwise, this is the only one I dig for. The other grave diggers do multiple cemeteries, but I'm a Montauk guy, so I just work here. Montauk was fabulous. We're a little bit of a different breed out here. We're tough. A lot of old French Canadians out here, a lot of Irish. We wore the masks where we had to, and we're like a brotherhood out here. And we don't do well alone. On the good side, it showed us how much we did care for each other, because we have a lot of elderly out here. People have summer homes, and they put their elderly people out here sometimes so they can still live on their own. And those people needed help during the pandemic. They were just, the elderly were petrified to go any place, because this before the vaccines, they knew it was going to kill them. They just knew it. It was like getting pneumonia when you're 90. There's not a lot of coming back from that. So they were scared. So it brought us closer together with the older community. The fire department really stepped. We did wellness checks, rode around, made calls, talked to people. We have a giant list of the older people in town, because we put on a senior citizen dinner every Christmas where everybody is invited to come down, listen to music, have a fabulous meal prepared by us, and that's what the people in Montauk do. I don't know if it's the proper word, but the unknown is what comes to my head. You just did not know what was going to happen the next day. Toilet paper shortage. One day, out of no place, there's no toilet paper on the shelves, and people are hoarding it, and kind of brought out the worst in some people too, which I'm not that kind of guy to talk about that stuff. I like talking about the good stuff. But even for us healthy people, it was kind of a scary thing. I had to transport COVID patients in my ambulance to the hospital. I'm over 65. They really didn't want us transporting, but we're a volunteer department, and the people are working during the day, and I kind of work part-time, so I was around. So we would get ourselves wrapped up in the little bubble suits and take care of that patient. I saw what people look like having the worst part of the virus in them. And besides being scared, they were sick and scared. And yes, it affects us, not knowing, is that going to happen to my parents? Is that going to happen to me, to my immediate family? So it was, scary's not the word. It was the unknown. That's the word that comes to mind.